Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1.
You'll hear a mother, Shirley, talking to Kate, an admissions officer at a school. First, you'll have some time to look at questions 1 to 3. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 3.
Good morning, you must be Shirley Peters. My name's Kate.
Yes, hello, I'm Shirley Peters. Nice to meet you.
You have a 10 o'clock appointment with us.
That's right. I'm supposed to go to the admissions office. Is that here?
Yes, it is. Please take a seat as I have several forms for you to fill in to enable you to enrol your son at this school. We have a form for your name, address and so on, one for the health of your son, and one for him to choose extra subjects to join in.
Thank you.
Now, firstly, this form is just so we have a record of your son's personal details. Can you fill it in for me?
Yes, I'll do that now.
Can I just check the details with you? Your son's first name is John.
No, that's his middle name after his father, Richard John. My son's name is Colwyn. Can you please spell it C-O-L-W-I-N, not C-O-L-W-Y-N, as some people do?
Yes, I'll make a note of that. And how old is Colwyn?
I've put down that he's entering year 6, so therefore he's 11 years old, turning 12 this year.
So at the moment, he's 11.
Yes, correct.
You now have some time to look at questions 4 to 10. Now answer questions 4 to 10.
Let's move on to your address. Do you live at 7 Watley Crescent, Mount Lawley?
Yes, that's right. The street is spelt W-H-A-T-L-E-Y Crescent in Mount Lawley.
Yes, I can see you've written that. Which phone number is best to contact you on?
Well, I'm out and about doing things during the day, so probably my mobile rather than the home number.
So that's 041 3325 888.
Yes, 041 3325 888.
Secondly, can you complete this form regarding your son's health?
Yes, I'll do it for you now.
Thank you. Now, can I go through the more important areas of this form with you to make sure our information is accurate?
Yes, of course.
Is your son taking any medication at the moment that the teachers will need to be aware of?
Yes, he has asthma, so he will be carrying his puffer in his school bag.
So he has a puffer. Is he allergic to anything?
Yes, peanuts. Actually, he should avoid all types of nuts.
That's okay, because we have a policy of not having any nuts in our school. Is there anything else that you think we should be aware of?
As I've written down, he also wears glasses, which he needs to keep on all the time.
I'll highlight that section on the form so his teacher will know about his glasses. Finally, this school has a wide range of interesting subjects that your son can participate in. Could you mark on this form what your son would like to do?
Yes, certainly. Here you are.
Firstly, it seems your son is particularly interested in football, so I'll make a note of that. Secondly, with regard to music, would you like him to start learning the piano in music class?
Yes, that would be fantastic.
Now, turning to art, I'll let his art teacher know that he likes drawing cartoons.
Wonderful.
Finally, let's look at languages now. Did you know that Mandarin was actually only started at the school this year?
Really? Well, I think Chinese would be the most useful, even though my son's friends have already been learning Indonesian and Italian.
Well, now we have all the information we require about your son. We hope he enjoys himself at our school.
I'm sure he will.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear an extract from a radio program for people who live abroad. Listen and answer questions 11 to 17. Listen and answer questions 11 to 17.
You're listening to Expat News, a weekly broadcast for the English-speaking community in this great city. In today's programme, we'll be hearing from Tom O'Hara, who's going to tell us about all those different associations you can join. Tom.
Good evening. Yes, in a city with so many of its residents born outside the country, it's hardly surprising there's such a huge range of expatriate clubs and societies. And many of these, of course, are aimed at English speakers. So, first and perhaps most obviously, we have the sports clubs, which in some cases field teams in things like rugby and tennis that compete against clubs in other parts of the country or even abroad. You don't have to play at this level to have fun, though. They can be just a great way to do some exercise and, of course, to get to know other people, especially if you're new in town. The same can be said of the many hobby and interest clubs that have sprung up here. Everything from landscape photography, such as the Viewfinders Club in the Harbour District, or Focus on the Airport Road, to old favourites like stamp collecting. Remember that this country has a long tradition of unusual and perhaps even eccentric societies, so there should be something for everyone. A place where you can meet people of different nationalities with the same social and/or cultural interests as you. For those who may be interested in rather more than just friendship, there's a wide range of lively social clubs. Several singles associations organise dancing of various kinds, while for people in a real hurry, there's speed dating, in which everyone talks to everyone else for just 5 minutes. Then, at the end, they decide which of them they would like to meet again by ticking their names on a list. In complete contrast to these are the many religious associations, reflecting the diversity of faith groups present in this multicultural city. Many of them, of course, have their own places of worship. Perhaps also of interest to those who've come here from other parts of the world are the international and cultural societies. These often provide a meeting place for people from a specific country, China, for instance, and particular ethnic groups, such as Afro-Caribbeans. As in other major cities, we have here local branches of many charities with names familiar around the world. Meetings of human rights organisations like Amnesty International are held regularly in English, as are those of environmental groups such as Greenpeace. All funds raised, by the way, go to the same kinds of good cause as they do in other countries you may have lived in. Inevitably, perhaps, there are also the political clubs, often connected with a particular party and, indeed, a particular country. So we have, for example, a local association of Republicans linked to and campaigning for that party in the US, and Liberal Democrats here doing the same for their party in Britain. Finally, on a lighter note, there's plenty to choose from in the performing arts. Whether you enjoy taking part or just watching and listening, you can take your pick from a whole range of groups. To take just a couple of examples, there's light opera at the Memorial Hall in the city centre, or a very lively amateur theatre company in the Park District. In summer, they give open-air performances of Shakespeare plays, free of charge.
Now answer questions 18 to 20. Now answer questions 18 to 20.
I should mention at this point that clearly some districts have a higher concentration of English-speaking clubs than others, and that certain parts of town tend to specialise in particular activities. An obvious example would be the number of water sports clubs down near the river. Whatever the number, though, they usually have one thing in common. With the exception of a few associations linked to particular countries and supported by their embassies here, in the vast majority of cases, it is the individual members who fund them, so an entry fee or a subscription will be charged. You may be used to council-subsidised sports centres and the like in your home country, but I'm afraid that's not the case here. Assuming you can afford it then, you can be fairly sure that somewhere out there you'll find a club that caters for your own particular fascination. If it's very important to you and you intend to spend a lot of time on it, it might even determine which district of the city you decide to live in. In the unlikely event that you really can't find such a club, the solution is to try to persuade friends and anyone else you meet of the need for one. You could also use the local small ads on the internet to suggest the idea. You'll be amazed at just how many people share even the strangest interest. Then you can start your own.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
3.
You will hear part of a talk on cultural research.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Having referred briefly to the general definition of culture, I want to move on to an example of cultural research in action, a real example of what researchers into culture are doing. This is a study done in 2004 into the global teenager hypothesis. Now, the global teenager hypothesis states that the values and attitudes of teenagers all over the world have become very similar, that teenagers are part of a global culture, rather than a national or a regional one. This study investigated the subject of materialism in 3 different cultures. It asked if teenagers' attitudes to materialism were similar or different in those 3 different cultures. I'd like to go through the main points of this study because I think it demonstrates the interest and usefulness of this kind of research. The research took a sample of 556 high school students of between 14 and 17 years of age from 3 countries. The 3 countries, being also 3 differing cultures, were China, Japan, and the USA. The high schools were in medium-sized cities, and the students came from middle-class areas. There were 172 respondents from China, 168 from Japan, and 216 from the USA. The students were asked to reply to a questionnaire or survey, which consisted of 7 statements. They were asked to say if they agreed or disagreed with the statements. The questionnaire was filled in during the students' regular class time. I'll give you some examples of the statements in the questionnaire. And, by the way, if you want to look into this in further detail, I've got the reference here. Let me see. Oh yes, it's the International Journal of Consumer Studies, Volume 28, Number 4 of September 2004. The first statement was, "It is really true that money can make you happy." Respondents were asked, as they were asked about all the statements, to give their answer on a scale of 1 to 7. 1 on the scale indicated, "I strongly disagree." 4 on the scale was neutral. And 7 on the scale was, "I strongly agree." The second statement was, "My dream in life is to be able to own expensive things." And the fifth was, "Having the right possessions is the most important thing in life." Let's look at some of the results.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
I'm sure.
Let's look at some of the results. With regard to the first statement, it was the Japanese teenagers who agreed most strongly that money could make you happy. The Americans were second, and the Chinese agreed least. However, regarding one's life dream being to own expensive things, it was American teenagers who agreed most strongly with this, and the Chinese who agreed least. As regards the fifth statement about owning the right things, the Americans agreed less strongly than the other two groups. It was the Chinese who agreed most strongly with this statement. I haven't been able to analyse all aspects of the study in this lecture, but it does suggest that the hypothesis is not supported by the data. It may be that the culture of the USA is more individualistic, whereas the Chinese culture is more collectivist or communitarian. However, it does not seem to support the global teenager hypothesis. As always, this is something on which we need to carry out more research.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
Hear a lecture. Questions 31 to 40 are based on the lecture. Before you listen, please look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen to the lecture and answer questions 31 to 40.
Urban and community forestry can make great differences in our lives. Each one of us can make a personal contribution. As we develop and apply technologies for a better way of life, oftentimes side effects adversely affect our natural environment. For example, in our urban areas, summer temperatures and noise levels are higher than in surrounding countryside. Air pollution problems are more concentrated, and the landscape is significantly altered, reducing personal health benefits available to us by reducing access to wooded areas and green open spaces. Trees help solve these problems. Now, 75% of us live in cities and towns, and we can act individually to improve our natural environment through planting and care of trees on our own streets, and by supporting community-wide forestry programs. Through technology, we are learning more about trees and how they benefit mankind, and how we can do a better job of planting and caring for these trees that make up our urban forests. Trees are major capital assets in Australia's cities and towns. Just as streets, sidewalks, sewers, public buildings and recreational facilities are part of a community's infrastructure, so are publicly owned trees. Trees, and collectively the urban forest, are important assets that require care and maintenance, the same as other public property. Trees are on the job 24 hours every day, working for all of us to improve our environment and quality of life. Without trees, the city is a sterile landscape of concrete, brick, steel and asphalt. Picture your town without trees. Would it be a place where you would like to live? Trees make communities livable for people. Trees add beauty and create an environment beneficial to our mental health. Trees impact deeply on our mood and emotion, providing psychological benefits which are impossible to measure. A healthy forest growing in places where people live and work is an essential element of the health of the people themselves. A well-managed urban forest contributes to a sense of community pride and ownership. Trees and other plants make their own food from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, water, sunlight, and a small amount of soil elements. In the process, they release oxygen for us to breathe. Trees remove gaseous pollutants by absorbing them through the pores in their leaf surface. Particulates are trapped and filtered by leaves, stems, and twigs, and washed to the ground by rainfall. Air pollutants injure trees by damaging their foliage and impairing the process of photosynthesis. They also weaken trees, making them more susceptible to other health problems, such as insects and diseases. The loss of trees in our urban areas not only intensifies the urban heat island effect from loss of shade and evaporation, but we also lose a principal absorber of carbon dioxide and trapper of other air pollutants as well.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.